Thank you for joining us. This is our first Wish Yorkshire event of 2021. And I just want to say thank you as well to the event. I'm Shelley Williams. I'm a Wish Yorkshire and Humber board member, and I'm a social housing solicitor at Bevan Britton. And I'm very pleased to say that I've been involved in organising today's event on CV writing and interview skills. First of all, before we launch into the event itself, and if people would like to see anything in particular covered by Wish Yorkshire in one, if they can let us know using the chat box function after the webinar. Taylor of 359.com. Anthony's a mental health, leadership and career development coach, and he'll be delivering which is intended to help you with the tools that you'll create the perfect pitch. Now, I hope you get lots.
Sorry, Shelley, can I just interrupt?
Hello?
Yeah. Shelley,
Yeah.
can I just interrupt for a second? Sorry about that. Can everyone put themselves on mute? Because I can't hear what you're saying.
There's too much, somebody's talking with a male voice in the background.
Can you put yourselves on mute, please? There's a gentleman talking in the background. That's better. Yeah. So hopefully everybody got the gist of what I was saying, and I'll hand you over to Anthony.
We're going to be looking at, so very quick, we're going to be looking at your CVs today and how we can start to make them much more powerful. And we're going to also be looking at, in terms of some basic around interview techniques, in terms of answering competency-based interview questions. So a quick bit about who am I and why this is relevant. So I had just under a 20-year career in the corporate world. I spent some time working for brands as head of communications for the likes of General Medical Council, Very, so on and so forth, Cheshire East Council. I also spent 4 years abroad in the Caribbean, which sounds very glamorous, not always as glamorous as it sounds, working really hard to turn around a small publishing company. And this was around the end of the 1990s, early 2000s. When I came back from that experience, even though I'd had 5 years in the PR world before that and done really well, and then added to my experience of turning on that business, I found it really difficult to get a job back in the UK. Indeed, it took me 8 to 9 months, and I went through the process of applying for hundreds of jobs, dozens of interviews, and was really struggling to sell myself. The process that I'm going to share with you today is born out of that experience, and in terms of how I managed to break through that and start to change things up a little bit. And I've since done this with a number of other clients as well. So that's a little bit of background about me. What I do now is I've got a mental skills consultancy. I do a lot of work with organizations when they're concerned about how do we get the best out of our people while looking after their well-being. So I do a lot of work with them around mental toughness, resilience, team development, that kind of stuff. I also do a lot around work around mental health as a licensed mental health first aid instructor. I've written a couple of, first book to publish there, Tips on the Top, How to Navigate Middle Management. And I've got a second book on mental toughness metaphors that's coming out shortly. And I'm just about to launch a podcast around mental fitness, but that's enough about me. What I do with this process now, I've done with clients for a number of years. I've done a lot with people in the social housing sector. So I don't know if any of you know Jo Fallon. She's now the Assistant Director of Development at Weaver Vale. Jo came to me wanting to really work with her CV and go for a promotion in a new organisation. So I was able to work with her, took her through the process that I'm taking you guys through today. And she then went on to secure that position. And I've done this with a number of other people in social housing. I've delivered this workshop today 2 or 3 times. It was delivered first for Wish North West, and then of course Wish North Wales as well, about 18 months or so ago. In fact, indeed, I've been working with Jo's husband as well, based on the work that we did together and how she found that. So that's a little bit about where this process has come from, it's how it's evolved, who I work with, those kind of things. In terms of the structure of today, we're going to be looking at some truths and myths about what employers want. We're going to be looking at what's wrong with most CVs and why actually they tend to hold us back without us realizing. And then we're going to get into the real process about how to write a CV that gets you that interview. It's really practical. So after about half an hour, I'm going to put you in breakout rooms to work together on starting to do this actual process. So this is a lot more than a monologue of me just talking at you for 2 hours. We're then going to be looking at how you craft your personal promise as well, which is going to be much more impactful from the way that most people do it. And then after that, towards the end of this session, we're going to be looking at how you can start to utilize what you've learned in writing your CV to help you with interview or competency-based interview questions. We are going to hopefully around time have about a 10-minute break as we go through this, because I know 2 hours on a Zoom call is a bit exhausting for anybody. Has anyone got any questions about what we're going to be covering? Is that all okay? Yeah, great. In your workbooks, hopefully have you all got your workbooks? Everyone got those? Yeah, hopefully you've had a chance to print them off. Everything you're going to go through that. The first couple of pages are there for you to fill in what I'm going to take you through, just to make sure that you've captured this rather than sending out a bunch of slides. And then the process about what you're going to follow, everything you'll need to continue this process after this session is in that workbook as well. So you'll have everything you'll need to do that. So what do employers want to know? Anyone got any questions? What's the one question that's on every employer's lips? Anyone got any ideas?
Whether you'll benefit them.
Yeah, pretty much, whether you're going to benefit them. Sorry. Yeah, so employers, what's everyone want to know? It's simply this. You need to answer this question. What can you do for me? That's the only question that's on any employer's lips. Every time they're reading your CV or in the interview, they're asking themselves this question: what is this person going to be able to do for us? And we need to be able to answer this at every opportunity we can, and answer it in as many different ways as we can. So what we're going to be doing with this is about learning, getting them to buy into you rather than you having to sell yourself. And at the minute, a lot of the time, we are going into interviews in our CV from on our heels. What we want to be doing with this process is putting ourselves on our front foot, out on our toes. Employers, it's a bit like, see financial services, they're buying future performance only. And just as it says with financial services adverts, past performance is no indicator of future performance. What we're trying to do is eliminate the concerns, the doubts that somebody has about our future performance by starting to write what we're going to do for them in a different way, and being a lot more aware about what actually that is going to be. So yeah, in terms of, we need to be putting ourselves in their shoes, because what we think we're selling might not actually be what they want to buy. And a lot of the time, this is not about technical ability. It's about, if you think about it, you've got two candidates and they both have technical ability, what's going to be the differentiator? It comes down to something more than technical ability. Because if you get to that interview stage, it's pretty much a given that you're going to operate technically at the level that employer needs you to do. So what's going to be the thing that separates you from other people? And that's what we're going to be able to start looking at as we go through this. There are 5 things that pretty much most people want, personally and then professionally. Personally, we'd all like more money, we'd all like more time, we'd like more choice, fewer hassles, and a lot less worries. So how does that translate at work? People want results. If an organization is hiring you, whether it's a legal profession, whether it's tenancy, whatever it is, they want results. They want to hit your targets, whatever that looks like. They want more time. So as a manager, if I'm hiring someone, I want to be able to trust that you can do the work that I need you to do, and that I can delegate things down to you, freeing up more of my time so that I can do the work that I need to be doing. They want more choices. They want more choices about how they can spend their time and where they can put their focus. I don't want to have to be wet nursing somebody and worrying about somebody's performance all the time and hanging over their shoulder. I don't want lots of problems. I want to be able to have fewer problems as possible. Everyone wants that. And I want to be able to trust that someone can get on with the job that I'm paying them to do. So if all the time you're answering and showing an employer how you can help them have those 5 things, you're going to be putting yourselves in a much better position to get the job. We are emotional beings. We are not logical beings. We're emotional beings that sometimes think logically. We're not logical beings that sometimes are emotional. So people hire on emotion, and then they're justifying that with the facts and the data at hand. So the facts and the data are your CV, how you interview, and what you've done in the past. And the reality is people hire people they know, like, and trust. So our key is to build that know, like, and trust in somebody. Once you can start to do that, then you can start to really put yourself in a much stronger position to be able to get that job, to be able to get that nod. And what I need to remember is that CV only gets you an interview. It's what you do when you get to the interview that gets you the job. No one's ever hired somebody just on the base of their CV without actually at least speaking to them, going through some kind of interview process. So we need to remind ourselves that actually our CVs are just the stage. They are the second stage in a 5-stage process. It goes application, CV, interviews, references, and getting the offer. Your CV is only the second stage in that process. So we need to be mindful of that. Anyone got any questions so far? Any challenges to any of that? Happy to have any challenges. Okay. So what's wrong with most CVs? First thing is they fail to get the reader excited about you. That's the reality of it. You know, your CV is a bit like your movie trailer. You know, you want to go to movies, you all want to look at the trailer first, don't you? Or if you're looking at a book, what's the first thing you do? You look at the cover and then you look at the back of the book, you read the blurb. If that doesn't get you excited, you're not going to buy the book. So it's got to grab your attention. If you think of someone who's looking through CVs, they might be getting 30, 40, 50 CVs. I know when I was at Warrington Council, when I was restructuring the comms department, I got 70 CVs for one job. I thought, you know, the thought of wading through 70 CVs just filled me with dread. So, you know, you've got to grab that attention. And that's to have a big impact on that. And a lot of the time people, you know, when I was going through 70 CVs, I would use any excuse to cut someone out. So let's have a look at some of the other reasons. The other reasons CVs hold people back is they pigeonhole you. They force you to think about, you worked here, you had that job title. At every stage, these are creating labels based on the past, not what you're going to do for that employer. I make assumptions, we all make assumptions about people based on how we look, the interview, the job titles they've got on their CVs, where they've worked. We're making assumptions all the time. What we need to do is challenge those assumptions. We need to get somebody thinking a bit differently about us. So if your CV sounds like and looks like everybody else's, you're getting a label right from the get-go. Oh, it's another CV. Starts out the same, looks the same, reads the same. I'm then going to have to start to unpick each of that. So CVs typically tend to kind of pigeonhole us. They're a snapshot of the past if they're written in the traditional kind of way. What we need to be doing is writing things a bit differently, showing people what it is we can do for them, not what it is that we've done for another employer. It's a bit like you date someone. You're not interested in how they were with their ex-girlfriend or boyfriend. You want to look at what it's going to be like with you. So we need to be thinking about it in that way. Traditionally written CVs force the reader to make interpretations or judgments based on what you've done in the past. What we want to be doing is taking out those assumptions and judgments and being really explicit about what is it we can do for them in the future. Does that make sense? Does people kind of agree with that when you think about your own CV? Yeah. So they naturally limit about what they say about you because they tend to force us to focus on two things: experience and qualifications. Well, you know, I work as a coach, a number of different things. Just because people have got a qualification doesn't mean they're any good at something. We've probably all experienced doctors and dentists like that. So, you know, just because someone's got a qualification doesn't mean it's good. Just because someone's experienced of doing something doesn't mean actually that they're learning from that experience and that they're getting better as a result of that. So we need to show the potential employer that we're a lot more self-aware about what it is our skills are and how we can apply them for that person going forward. And then they don't really go deep enough because a lot of the time it's, you know, it's I've done this, I'm responsible for this, I'm responsible for that. We need to go deeper. We need to show the person that we understand how we do what we do and what is it that we do. And we need to be answering those kind of questions. And when we start to do that, we start to do that by finding what I call our transferable assets. These are more than skills, as we're going to come on to see shortly. And they hide your USP. They hide what's uniquely you about you. And that's at the end of the day, you know, we don't want to be blancmange. We want to be something different. We want to set ourselves, what makes us different from the next candidate? You are a unique individual with a unique set of values, beliefs, skills, personality, everything that shapes what you do and how you do it. You might, you know, there are probably a couple of solicitors on this call. you don't both do the same thing in the same way. You might do things slightly different. You create something that's different. So we need to create that desire, that thirst to know more is about what it is that you do and how you start to go about and do that. And they're inflexible because they tend to be structured in the same kind of way. You know, they're inflexible about that. And what we need to do is show that kind of flexibility and show how we can start to demonstrate that. So what I want you to take away from this is this. I want you to consider being Marmite rather than blancmange. You either love or hate Marmite. I would rather be Marmite and send my CV out to 10 potential employers and have 5 of them go, I hate this guy, he's not for me. And have the other 5 of them go, this guy's great, he could be for us. Rather than send out a blancmange one that sits on the maybe pile in 10 employers, 10 potential employers. So you want to be Marmite rather than blancmange. So what are the 6 most common mistakes that most recruiters, or all recruiters, and all potential hirers see in CVs? And if you've ever, anyone gone through the process of hiring people? Who's done that?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So a few of us, let's see if you recognize some of these mistakes in some of the CVs that you've seen. Format. And what I mean by that is you tend to see things the wrong way round or in the wrong order or overly complicated or lots of superfluous information in there that you really don't need. One of the common things is people put their full addresses at the top. Why anyone would do that, I have no idea. In a year, you know, in an era where we're obsessed about data protection, why we waste time and space sticking our postal addresses on CVs, I don't know. And there's lots of other mistakes you can see in formatting as well. Spelling mistakes. Who's ever seen spelling mistakes in CVs? What do you think about a person when you see spelling mistakes?
Hate it. I absolutely hate it. It switches me off completely. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I got this from someone who, a boss I used to work for in my career. You know, if there's a spelling mistake in your CV, it went in the no pile. Because if you've been sloppy about your own CV, what makes me give you any confidence you're going to be great in my work for me? So if you're going to bring that sloppiness there, you're going to bring it into work. And that is a deliberate spelling mistake in that slide, by the way, if you haven't spotted it. So yeah, spelling mistakes. Tone and style as well. That's absolutely, you know, we tend to see this a lot with mistakes around tone and style. You know, if you've got words in your CV or phrases in your CV like responsible for, take it out. Just because you're responsible for something doesn't mean you're any good at it. Doesn't mean you actually did it well. So we need to be removing those. We need to be removing dull and uninteresting language, passive language. We need to grab their attention. We need to be changing the style about that that's different. So a lot of tone and style just switches people off about CVs. If I see passionate about or a good communicator or something, it's an instant turn off. It's, you know, it's just rubbish. Everyone puts that. We need to be changing that up. Length as well. So many CVs are either too short or too long. You know, sometimes I know in medical CVs, I come from a family of doctors, their CVs are ridiculously lengthy, like 14, 15, 16 pages, because that's what's expected. In the corporate world, if you can't get across enough in 2 pages to get an interview, then you're not writing your CV in the right way. If you see CVs that are 3, 4, 5 pages long, then that's a no-no. And believe me, I've done it. I remember when, again, I was at Warrington, somebody sent in a CV that was 12 pages long. And then when I didn't put him forward, he used the disability card and said I had to give him an interview. And I pointed out the fact that in the job description, it was being able to write briefly. And said, if you can't write a CV in less than 12 pages, you don't fulfill the basic criteria. So, you know, let's be clear about, we need to write CVs 2, maybe 2.5 pages long. Any longer than that, and we need to be questioning about how we're writing them and what kind of information we're putting in there. Clarity. If we're not clear around the language that they use, if we're not creating clarity in how we're communicating in our CV, then, you know, you're leaving space for doubt, for misinterpretation, for assumptions and internal judgments based on the reader. So we need to cut out jargon. We need to cut out sloppy waffling text and verbose language. Clarity equals confidence. When you're really clear and can write with clarity on your CV, that's creating a confidence. And the reader's going to think that actually this person knows what they're talking about. And then lastly, order. I've seen all sorts of crazy orders on CVs. You know, you've got interests and hobbies at the start. You've got work. You've got educational things at the start. You've got career chronology further down. We just want a nice, simple order, but it's amazing how many times people get that wrong. So there are 3 key elements that to a CV they're going to set you apart. The first one is the format, just getting that bit right. The second one is what I call the personal promise, and that is what most people call their profile bit at the top. The reason we call that personal promise is that, firstly, it's unusual, and the second is you're making a promise about this is who you are, what you do, and how you're going to do it, and that immediately separates you from somebody else. And when you get that bit right, it compels the reader to read on and read the rest of your CV. So we call it a personal promise because a promise is about something you're going to do in the future. And then there's what we call the transferable assets. These are what really set you apart, and this is what we're going to spend the bulk of today looking at in terms of creating that. So let's have a look quickly at format. You might be thinking at this point, oh my God, he's going to ask me to do something crazy. It isn't. It's not radically different, but we want to eliminate any fancy graphics, colors, fonts, boxes, weird layouts. For God's sake, don't put your picture on there because you immediately make people make assumptions about what you look like, and they do, and they will, make an assumption about that. So make sure it's not like that. It's very simple. You've got your personal details at the top, and please don't put CV or curriculum vitae or resume. It's pretty obvious what it is. So again, you're wasting space. Please don't put your full home address on there. It literally needs your telephone number, your email address, and maybe your LinkedIn profile. And if you haven't got a really good up-to-date LinkedIn profile, that needs to be a priority as well. Then we go into your personal promise, and we're going to look at that after we look at the main bulk of your CV. And that's answering these questions: who you are, what you do, and how you do it. And then we've got your transferable assets, and we're going to come on to that. Then you look at your career chronology, who you've worked with, what months, what years you worked there, and a couple of different transferable assets under each of those. And again, we'll come on to that. Education, and if they're relevant, interests and hobbies. If you're just going to put, I like reading and going to the cinema when it's open, please maybe think about leaving that out. If you've got interests or hobbies that you can relate to about your career and what you do, or can be a really interesting talking point, or can add something else that you can bring in, then please feel free to put them down there. But if it's just I like reading or going to the cinema or cooking, then we need to be thinking about not putting them in there, not wasting space. So let's start to look down and what to do in each section. So we've kind of covered that. I'm going to skip on because of time. We've covered about what not to include in terms of personal details, those kind of things. We're going to come back to your personal promise. So let's move into the transferable assets. For each job, you're going to be able to need to identify the most relevant transferable assets that apply to the job that you're going to be going for. And for each asset, we need to have at least 2 to 3, ideally 4 to 6 examples of that asset that we can draw upon and illustrate what it is we're going to do. Does that make sense? So bear with me 1 second. I'm just moving around something from this. All examples should focus on your value and what sets you apart. These are your USP, your competitive advantage. And then we're going to look at your career chronology. So that should be literally a short description of the company and a very couple of examples about what you've done in that role, again, based on your transferable assets. Something along those lines. That's it on your career chronology. We don't want, you sometimes see where someone's got, I've worked at this place, and then they've got about this much text underneath it. We're going to change this up a little bit so that actually under your career chronology has just got 2 or 3 lines, and that's about it. And then any education, any courses, establishments attended, those kind of things, any continual learning that you've done, that's where you can start to put that in. I've got a view, and it's just a personal one, you can disagree with me if you like, but if you get to 35 or over, if you get to my age, 48, and you're still putting Anthony Taylor, BA honours on top of your CV, it's time to move on. It's fine. Most people have got a degree, put it in the education section, but unless you've got a PhD or an MBA or something like that, you might want to consider taking that out of the top. I just think it looks a bit like you're looking at the glory days. So feel free to put that in the education section, but not at the top. But if you've got a different view, that's absolutely fine. And again, family and interest, be careful about what you're putting in there as well. Be careful of the usual guff like films, social life, and that kind of stuff. You know, anything that's going to be different, it's going to prompt a conversation, or that you can allude to how that sort of fits with some of your transferable assets, that's absolutely fine. So I've been talking about what are these transferable assets. What are they? It's a competency you can evidence by demonstrating its use at the same level of complexity across multiple situations. So the example I'm going to give, and a bit of eye candy for you ladies, is David Beckham. I don't know if any of you know about this, but early in his career, he scored a goal from inside his own half for Man United. Anyone ever see that?
Yep.
Nodding. Yeah. So that took a huge amount of skill, you know, hand-foot coordination, depth perception, range, all that kind of stuff. But he never did it again. So huge amounts of skill, but not a transferable asset because he never did it again. What became his signature transferable asset was two of them. One was pinpoint passing, and the second thing was scoring goals from free kicks in crucial situations. So you could pretty much rely upon Beckham to score from a free kick in a really crucial situation. He did it for England, he did it for United, he did it for wherever he played. That became his transferable asset, an executable skill performed under intensity on multiple occasions. It took the same amount of skill as scoring from the halfway line, you know, hand-foot coordination, depth, but he did that time and time again. Whereas the one-off goal from inside his own half was just a bit of skill. It wasn't a transferable asset. So how can we start to identify our transferable assets? This is where we start to deconstruct our career, and we develop a list of possible competencies or possible transferable assets by deconstructing our career, looking at everything, looking at the knowledge, the abilities, everything that we did project by project. And I'm going to take you through the framework of how we start to do that. Then step 2 is to identify and evidence those competencies by looking for common groupings of the different skills or competencies that you've shown. Then you start to pull them together into groupings. And then you start to identify your transferable assets by looking for the most common group of transferable assets. And we'll start to look at how we actually start to do that. So we use a framework called STAR, which has anyone come across that before? STAR framework. So it's a very simple framework. It stands for situation, task, action, and result. And this is a couple of slides of somebody who's a client of mine. She drove all the way up from Brighton to work with me on this. She spent 8 hours one day working on it. And these are the things that she completed. So what she did here was look at what was the company she was working for, what was her position, head of legal intervention. And she went through a particular situation so she had to maintain service during a period of unsettlement due to budget situation. She started to identify what were the tasks that she needed to be able to do strategic level. Then what were the actual actions that she took? What were the results that came from those actions? And what skills, knowledge, and competencies did she show in doing that? So multitasking, leadership, financial management, creativity, communication, influencing, I can't remember, I think that was negotiating. These are all the skills and the competencies that she showed to do that particular project, based on that. And then she went through and deconstructed her career by doing that. And then what we start to do, I'm just going to move forward for a second, is we start to identify. So she then went through each of those things and started to add up how many times leadership was in there, how many times financial management was in there, how many times partnership working or political awareness was in there, and started to count up how many of those that she had. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. I want you to work 2 together. I think one person might need to work as a 3, or I'll work with that other individual. And what I want you to do is spend 15 minutes working with one person. So in your workbooks, you'll see certain questions that can help stimulate how you're going to think about your career, how you're going to deconstruct it. And then there's a blank framework for you to start to do that. Has everyone got that? So I want you to, one person, so Shelley's working with Cam, say, Cam, I want you to help coach Shelley round. So Shelley's going to think about, a recent project in her career that she's doing. What was the situation? What was the high-level situation behind it? What were the high-level tasks that she knew she needed to think about doing? What were the actual actions that she took? And what were the results that came from that? And then what were the kind of competencies and skills that she showed to be able to do that? Then after about 15 minutes, I want you to swap over, and Shelley's going to coach Cam, and by asking questions, again, to think about that while Cam fills out her form. Does that make sense? Has anyone got any questions about this? I will dip in and out of your groups to ask any questions and give any advice and things like that as we go through this. I'm going to give you half an hour to do that, and then we'll come back, have a quick chat about it, and then we'll have a short break. Does that work for everyone?
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to put you in breakout rooms.
Yep.
Did you any questions about it? Who found it useful? Who found it difficult?
Both.
Both. Go on, Shelley. You got 20 seconds. Elaborate.
Just say it. Yeah. I'm sort of looking back on. I've not had done a CV for 8 years because I've been in the same sort of team. So looking back at, people say, well, what have you done? And it's like, well, I don't know. I'll have to look back. And going through this is great because if I want to move on to the next level. I can establish what competencies I do have and what sort of things I'm using now, which would allow me to progress. So it's going to be a really useful thing for me. Yeah,
Fab.
Just need to find the time to sit down and do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Any learnings from anyone else? Any insights or?
I think it's much easier to do with somebody else.
Yes.
I think that one of the things that I was saying to Deborah, I really struggle with is identifying things, and then the way I might talk about it doesn't necessarily make it sound very good. And then Deborah was just saying what I'd said in a completely different way. And I was like, oh, that sounds really good. That sounds way better than the way that I've just put it. And also the competency section of the STAR. I think I said that to you when you came into our breakout. I've done STAR, but it stopped at result and it didn't talk about competencies. And often I think competence is quite difficult to give examples of, but if you do it in this way, it's easier to fit the competencies to those examples. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. It does. And what I typically find with clients, it's a bit like we were saying, I think I used that metaphor with your group, was, once you start when you're trying to push a heavy object, or, playground, the old playground turntable things, what are they called?
Roundabout.
Thank you. You start pushing off when everyone's on, it's really hard work, and then it gets faster and faster. And this is a bit like that. Once you start at first, it's really hard work to kind of unpick what you've done. But then typically what I find is, they get into it, and they get much faster and much quicker about doing it. It becomes easier. So it is a bit harder at first. Working with somebody, whether that's a coach or somebody else, can really help with that. Patricia, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, hi. I was just going to ask about Cam. I was in with Cam and she's had to leave, but she did manage to go through a STAR, and we both did one. But how do you know how long to give those examples? Like, you could potentially be going on too much. Do you know what I mean? And then you kind of lose the person that's interviewing you. Oh, the situation was this, and then you're going on about the situation for far too long when you should have moved on to the task. How can you gauge the time for that example? What would you suggest?
I would suggest that some of that comes down to rehearsing. Mm-hmm. So thinking about, I would never go into the interview having rehearsed and thought about, put myself in the mind of the interviewer. What are the kind of questions that ask me? How might I answer them in practice? And, and when I'm working with clients, sometimes, typically clients can go on and on, they waffle a bit. And that's where it's useful to have rehearsed it. So when I was working with Jo Fallon, who went for that job at Weaver Vale, we did that. And then that's what she won't mind me saying. I know that, I've asked her permission. She, a couple of times in the interview practice, she did waffle. And I go, okay, let's pull it back. What's the core stuff you want to try and get across in about a minute to 2 minutes maximum? And leave it up to them. And if the interviewer wants to know more, they'll ask for more. But you kind of want to be, just giving them enough that answers the question. If they want to go in a bit more, and they might say, well, tell me a bit more detail about that. Then you could go into being a little more detail.
So would you say just get the key points? So, you can say quantify something really small and just get the key points. they've got the gist of that. That's the situation. Then move on, and just the key points. Would you say that would be better than?
Yeah, definitely. So I mean, we're going to come on to. We're going to move on in a minute, but yeah. So you'd say something like, look, the situation was my team was going through a restructure, and I'll use personal experience. I was told that I had to lose 5 staff in the next 6 months. I need to reorganize. So I knew what I needed to do was think about what we were going to do, look at the workloads, look at where I thought the resources were, start to reorganize my budget, start to think of who I might go. I also need to think about how I was going to support those people that might lose their jobs. And I also need to think about how am I going to keep the team motivated while we know they go through that review. Therefore, the actions I took were X, Y, and Z. What meant was that after 6 months, I was able to close down 5 of those roles, but team-wise, we maintained the performance that we needed to meet, something like that. It's that kind of level of detail.
Stephanie, can I also add that sometimes it's really useful, and I think people often overlook it, that if you do some research and you really dig into the spec and the person description and just talk to people around them, you will be much more focused on what they're actually looking for. And
absolutely
forget that they will have a view of what they're looking for, and it sometimes helps to focus your answers and divert you away from stuff they're really not interested in. You may have done it and it may have some relevance, but they will be looking for a particular set of criteria, and it can help to focus that. And the other thing is, just like we've talked, and I talked to Rebecca, that even talking to your colleagues and actually running stuff past them, and they might say, well, you've missed this, but you're crackingly good at this, and I've just not heard that. Not being afraid to use people around you to actually bounce off of.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, quite agree. That's really good advice there. Definitely. Thank you for that, Deborah. So yeah, I think to move on from this, what I'd say is when you're doing this bit, don't be afraid to go into some of the granularity. So I know the couple of groups I was talking to, thinking, well, what level do I think about the situation? Really try and drill it down. So you might end up with 10, 12 pages of these kind of notes. So really think about, what's go down to a fairly granular level about a particular challenge or a task. Maybe it's pitching for a piece of business, maybe it's turning around, a department. There might be 5 things in turning around a department that you had to do. So go down to that kind of granularity, and that will help you rather than staying too big, because then it becomes very difficult to identify the tasks, the actions, and the results. So don't be afraid to go a little bit deeper, and that's why working with someone can help with that. So you've got the question sheet as well, which hopefully will help you if you're trying to work on your own, be a prompt to the kind of questions you think about in each of those sections. Then what you're going to do is you're going to ID and evidence each of your competencies. So you might, you might have different things that could be under the umbrella of communication skills, or a couple of things that might be under the umbrella of, say, influencing. So you might decide that actually 2 or 3 of those are going to go and become influencing or leadership or whatever it might be. And, we need to be thinking about our competencies in terms of, there are kind of business competencies and technical ones. So business ones might be, integrity, trust, honesty, coaching skills, questioning, communication. Technical skills, competencies might be accountancy, marketing, software programming, whatever it might be. But then you've also got your what I call these other ones, which are individual ones, such as communication, visionary, empowering, those kind of things. So we need to be thinking about how you might label or segment your competencies in certain things. So some examples of kind of competencies you might come up with might be, ability to negotiate, flexible, adaptable, resilient, intellectual agility, copes with the unexpected. All these are kind of things that you might come up with. And then you identify your transferable assets by looking for a common use or the number of times that those competencies are evidenced. And I simply add them up using a 5-bar gate. How many times did I have communication down? How many times did I have leadership down? And the highest numbers, they become your transferable assets. And what you're trying to identify is get to a point where you've got 6 to 10 transferable assets, each evidenced by 4 to 6 examples. So if communication is one of my transferable assets, I will have 4 to 6 examples of when communication, I've evidenced that I'm a good communicator. Or if it's a negotiation, I'll have 4 to 6 examples of when negotiating has proven to be my transferable asset. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. So, you know, again, you just kind of add it up. So this is a kind of worked example. So ability to explain things simply once, coaching skills 5 times, able to inspire confidence in others was 4, commercially astute was 5, and you can start to see actually some of these, how many times you've got them, and identify what then are your transferable assets. And then you'd pick out your top 6, and those would be the ones that you would put down, because this is how you do what you do. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So you would have a flexibility or building rapport. You'd have one example when you're at company A, another example will be when at company B, and you've got a couple of other examples from other companies you'd worked at. With building rapport, you know, one example might be when you're at company A. So that's how you kind of, you come up with them by the end. What does that look like in the real world example? Well, this was taken from my own CV back in the day when I was still working in the corporate world, not running my own business. And so, you know, after my name at the top and my profile, which we're going to come on, my personal promise we'll come on to, it was structured like this. So it was teamwork and leadership, experience in leading teams throughout restructuring, rebuilding while maintaining required performance levels. And I could evidence. So if they'd say, in an interview, they might say, well, tell me a bit more about that. And I could go, okay, well, when I was at Cheshire East Council and I had to take my team from 28 down to 12, this is what I had to do. And I'd use the STAR framework to explain what was the situation, what was the task, what were the actions, and what were the results. Communications expertise. Again, a couple of examples there. Commercially aware. What do you mean by that? Well, actually, I successfully turned around a fairly publishing company, returning it to profit, and increasing shareholder value. Tell me more about that. So again, what I'm doing is making me, in the CV, I'm giving them an excuse, a reason to go, we've got to get this guy in for an interview. This is really interesting. He's clearly articulated and he knows what it is he does and how he does it. And he's given us some examples. I can now see what he can do for me. Rather than if I had, you know, a commercial director for a publishing company, you know, I've got to then, I'm allowing the reader, I'm asking the reader to interpret what I've done. I'm showing him what I do and how I do it in this way of thinking about writing my CV. So my CV looked like this. So it's simple stuff at the top, my personal promise, my 4 to 6 transferable assets, and then my career history with literally a short paragraph about each. Education, other positions, and then that was it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm going to take a cue from you guys. We're got about 35 minutes left. Do you want to carry on cracking on, or do you want a short 5-minute break?
I could do with a quick break if that's okay.
Yeah, quick break. So
Yeah.
my suggestion is, if you want, just mute yourselves or turn your cameras off, but don't disconnect from the session. And we'll come back and start again at 1:30 on the dot. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So yeah, stay online, but stop your videos or whatever, and I'll see you in 5 minutes. Right, so we're back. I know we've still got a bit to get through. So just want to very quickly recap on this bit. This bit takes time. So be patient with yourself. Be patient on picking that. Like I say, if I work with a client, typically it takes them somewhere in the region of 6 to 8 hours, occasionally a bit less, sometimes a little bit more. Not always 6 to 8 hours of coaching with me, but of them going through this process to get to that stage where they've identified their transferable assets. Be really honest with yourself. What did you do? Because when we come to competency-based interviews, that's where people fall down. They talk about, oh, well, we did this and we did that. And I know that cost me a job. I got selected out of 2,000 people to go for a job at Tarmac. And we had a 2-day assessment centre. And they said to us, we're interviewing, you know, got 12 of you on this. All 12 of you will get a job if you've got what we're looking for, or none of you will get a job. So it really was. And I missed out because in my competency-based interview, I didn't do enough of, I did this and I did that and I did the other. So you need to be ready to, what did you do? What were the actions that you took? What was the difference that you made? Take it in chunks. If you're going to deconstruct your career now and you're looking at 10 years or 15 years or more of career, don't try and sit down and do it all at once. Start with what your most recent bit is and do it in chunks, because otherwise you just get overwhelmed about it. But even if you're not considering moving on from a role, start the process now, because if you do, you're going to thank yourself for it later when you come to change roles. Right, you've had your break, so we're going to wake the puppy up again and crack on with it. Personal promise. I call it personal promise, as I think I alluded to back at the start, because A, it's unusual. People tend to call it a personal profile or a summary or something like that. Well, everyone calls it that. But if you call it a promise, that word promise is interesting because it's a commitment that you're making to how you work to that potential future employer. That immediately puts you as Marmite. It stands you out from the crowd. It makes you a bit different because no one else will be calling it personal promise. Then it's got to answer that, this really is the movie trailer. This is, your personal promise has one reason, its reason for being is one thing only, and that's to get people to read the rest of the CV. How many of you have looked at CVs, read the personal promise and gone, no thanks, and put the CV down? Anyone done that? Yeah, Rebecca's nodding. So, if you don't grip them in the first paragraph, you lost it. And so the personal promise is to get them to read the rest of your CV. So how are we going to do that? Answer 3 key questions. Who are you? How do you do it? And what is it that you do? And you're going to think, isn't that in the wrong order? Shouldn't it be what you do first and how you do it? Well, no, let me explain. So imagine this is answering who are you? These are real examples from clients. I bring my zest for life to my work. There's a client called John. An intelligent risk taker was called Robert. What do you think those 2 statements tell you about each of those people? How might you describe John? Just from that one sentence.
Friendly.
Yeah, friendly. What else?
Lively.
Lively. Enthusiastic. What about Robert? What does that tell you about Robert?
He's quite. I would imagine Robert to be quite a subdued person. Maybe not very outgoing.
Okay. What else might you think about him?
I would have said Robert was was a disruptive thinker and an innovator.
Ah, interesting. But interesting, isn't it? In 4 or 7 words, is it 7? Can't count. Someone in those short sentences, they've made a statement about themselves that gives you a picture of who they might be. And now you start to be interested. Oh, that's interesting. That's a bit different. How do you do it? I find solutions by undertaking which questions need to be asked. What does that tell you about John?
Prioritizing, sort of, he's prioritizing by what needs to be done, sort of thing. He's trying to tell you that he does that.
Yeah.
He works smart.
Sorry, say that again?
He works smart instead of working
hard.
hard.
Yeah, he works smart. Absolutely. He's thinking about the questions because he knows that when you find the right questions, you find the right answers.
Like simple English as well.
So he's a bit of a thinker. What about Bob? Direction setter of innovative solutions with the willingness to absorb situations and get on with it.
Language is not very plain.
It's not plain language, is it? But what might you take from what he said there?
Dynamic and adaptable to different situations.
Yeah, dynamic, adaptable, kind of just gets on with it, kind of level of mental toughness, that kind of attitude. So whether you're looking for that, I like that. At least you know what you're getting. He's Marmite. You know what you're going to get when you open that jar. And then what do? 18 years of practical integrated marketing ideas generation for clients and agencies across the world. That's John. So in 3 statements, what John's told us is I bring my zest to life for work. So I'm outgoing, I'm gregarious, I'm enthusiastic. I find solutions by asking the right questions that need to be asked. So I'm a thinker, I'm disruptive. Now it's, 18 years in the marketing agencies. So now it kind of fits, doesn't it? You're getting a bit of flavor for who John is and what he does and how he does it.
Yeah.
Bob, 32 years of leadership, multi-million-pound projects within the aluminium smelting industry. So if we go back to that one, direction setter, well, he's a director. Innovative solutions, willingness to absorb situations and get on with it. Multi-million-pound projects, he's a project manager in a big industry. So it kind of fits. Okay. So I'm now getting a sense of who Bob is, how he does what he does, and what actually he does. So, you know, it's got to be simple, direct, and clear. And in, you know, 3 very short sentences or statements, like John or Bob, Bob's an intelligent risk taker, called him Robert, it's the same guy. Actually, they're very short statements. They're able to tell you something about what they do and how they do it and who they are. And so you don't need paragraphs of text to read through. So here's some of my favorites. These are genuine ones. The charm of Bond, the intellect of M, the wit of Q, and the look of Pussy Galore. A sassy cosmopolitan girl who works hard and plays hard, tackles every challenge with verve, creativity, persuasion, and good humor. Since the age of 10, I pursued my desire to work in PR. How cool is that? What does that tell you about that person?
She watches lots of films.
Yeah, so she's taken the theme of Bond and gone, how can I apply this to me in a way that's interesting? So would you agree that if you saw that as your personal promise, you'd want to read on and find out more?
Yeah, you would, yeah.
Yeah. So she's achieved her objective, set herself apart from the competition, show a bit of personality about who she is, what she does, and how she does it, plays hard, tackling every challenge with verve, creativity, and persuasion, and what she does, she works in PR. This one's my favorite. Part-time visualizer, full-time flip-flop wearer. This is from a friend of mine, Martin Ellis, who's an executive search consultant. You can look him up on LinkedIn. And this was a genuine CV that came across his desk for a designer. And that's a quote from Martin. I don't know about you, but I had to talk to him. He was good. I told the client, including the bit about footwear, and they laughed. He had an interview on Wednesday morning. By Friday, he got the job. So again, the lesson, be Marmite. Be something that's creative and interesting, that, you know, you don't want to, the worst thing you can be is on the maybe pile. I'd rather be in the bin than on maybe. Because I know for every bin I go in, I'm going to be on somebody else's yes. So we can start to think about that. So what you're going to do is have some fun. I'm going to give you 10 minutes now, probably to work individually, because we're running out of time. I just want to cover interview questions. So I want you to think about, and in your workbooks, we've got the framework for that. I've got it there for you on that page of the workbook. I want you to start to think about yourself. Who are you? Come up with a short, punchy statement about who you are. How do you do it? A nice, short, simple sentence or a couple of sentences about how you do what you do. And what is it that you do? So Shelley, it might be, how many years have you been in this solicitor?
8 years.
So it could be something like 8 years solving the legal problems of clients all around the UK.
Yeah.
Or something like that. Maybe have a go. If you want to be a bit silly with it, think about it in the context of a superhero. Who would be your you know, just at this stage, just having fun with it. I want you to break down those mental barriers that will be holding you back from doing this. And then you can get Rebecca smiling, and then you can get into the real thing. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to just work your way through that. And then we'll, if anyone's got any questions, ask me.
More of a grimace, Anthony, to be honest. More of a grimace.
Is it? You have a nice grimace.
Anthony, will you
Yes.
flick back your slides to previous ones with Bob and John?
Oh.
Is that okay?
Yeah. That one?
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, thanks.
Anyone got anything they're willing to share?
I find this really hard, but this sounds a bit corny. But
Corny's great.
So I've got, so who are you? So I've got a social housing lawyer with the dynamics to raise the roof.
Oh, interesting. Okay, like it. Fantastic. Good.
Yeah. And then I've got how do you do it? That's as far as I've got. So I've got I find solutions by understanding the legal issues faced by the housing sector.
Like it. Good. And what's the and what will be the what do you do?
I haven't got that one yet.
I'd like to share and get some feedback if that's all right.
Yes, please do.
So I've not been overly creative, but what I've got is for who are you? I've put I'm an upbeat, positive problem solver. How do I do it? I find the most efficient and uncomplicated way of answering the right questions. And what do? I've got 13 years of turning nonsense data into meaningful insight.
Fantastic. Love that last bit. Definitely. I love all of it, but certainly love the last bit. Could you ask, in terms of nonsense data meaningful insight, who do you do that for?
Oh, I've done it for, I was telling Shelley before, I've done it for a raft of people, social housing at the moment, but I've done private sector, supply chain, debt recovery, I worked for the career service.
Okay, so you could say, what was it, data and, say that again, the last bit?
13 years of turning nonsense data into meaningful insight.
In both the public and private sector.
Right, thank you.
Something like that. What do you think? How does that feel for you?
Yeah, that's great, thank you.
Great. And I think if I got that, I'd be like, oh, that's really different. I'm going to read on, want to know a bit more about you.
Thank you.
And I love how you got the courage to say nonsense data into meaningful insight.
It always is. It's always a mess when you pick it up. Whether it's messy systems, messy processes, actually messy data, people not inputting things right. It's bridging the gap. What I do is bridge the gap between input and output, and work out how to do it most efficiently. So
yeah, because you know what you're speaking to there is you're speaking to a pain of a potential employer.
Yeah.
If you're going to work in my team, I've probably got the pain point of, I've got all this bloody data, it doesn't mean anything, I can't make head and sense of it, and my boss is busting my chops about what we're going to do with it, and you're going to solve my pain point. So again, we're thinking about speaking to the kind of people that we're going for. What are the pains that they want, that role that they're hiring for is going to solve? That's why no two CVs should be the same. I probably got, if I went in my files, I think I deleted a lot. I think I had about 40 different versions of the same CV. I'm always tweaking it a bit according to what I think that person is looking for, or what the role was, or what the industry was, just to try and speak their language a little bit and solve their, so that's great. I love that. Anyone else got one?
I struggled with the what do you do bit, but the others not, and I think this sounds really corny as well, actually. Followed off.
Go for it.
Who are you? I'm Wonder Woman, spinning many plates in the air and never dropping them. How do you do it? Being resilient, friendly and adaptable. Work should be fun. Laughing doesn't equal not working. What do you do? 22 years in the social housing sector, managing and delivering national event programmes. Do you think the last bit's a bit boring?
No, I think it's great because you've got a nice couple of interesting bits to tell me a bit about who you are. I've got your flavour of your personality now. If I'm looking for somebody really dour, then I don't want you, and that's fine.
I'm in the bin.
But if I'm looking for someone who's like, oh, can you be a breath of fresh air? You'd be adaptable. You get on with my team. That's going to cause me less headaches. I want to have a chat with you, and then a little bit about what actually is it you do. So, and it shows that even in that kind of maybe industry, that's something like you can bring a bit of flair and a bit of fun to otherwise something that might be a bit dry. So no, I mean, you could look at spicing up the other bit a little bit, but I wouldn't say it definitely needed it because you've done that in the first two. How comfortable would you see that being on your CV, Rebecca?
I think the Wonder Woman bit was just me trying to start my head working, to be fair, but yeah, well, I think it would make somebody read it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
you know what I mean. So,
and if that person's another woman, perhaps they might go, fantastic. You know, you might relate to it.
Yeah, and sometimes I'm not sure. Sometimes I think things can come across as arrogance, whereas, and that's how I feel sometimes. Like if you're bigging yourself up, I think that's an issue in terms of, you know, how does that come across? Am I bigging myself up in a good way, or am I coming across really arrogant?
Do you know what I
mean? As a woman, I don't know if it's just being a woman. I'm not sure really.
Interestingly, I just ran a workshop I do on imposter syndrome with the women in property. That was Kerry Whittle's Wish got me to do that, and I think, you know, women do suffer from that a bit more. I know there's some research to say that if a man and a woman are going for a role, a woman needs to see that she can do 90% of the job before she'll apply for it. A man will wing it on 50. Yeah. So I think there's some of that, but again, and I think we as British people do undersell ourselves. So I think as you know, I don't think from the very little I've known of you on this line, I don't think you'd ever come across as arrogant. You know, but so by reading a Wonder Woman statement, that's fun because it goes on to suggest that in your next line before you go on to be a bit more serious in what you do. So I wouldn't say that comes across as arrogant. But again, you want to sell yourself, and we're not good at selling ourselves. Right, I'm just conscious of Go on, someone else want to have a share?
I was just going to mention the actual phrase I used to open my CV for the job I have now. I'd been made redundant and I was struggling, and I was either too experienced, not experienced enough, and it tended to be focused on the experience bit. So I went off, basically taught self-employed, I had 4 jobs at one time. And I thought, do you know what? I've got nothing to lose now. So my opening statement was, and this is absolutely true, I said, evacuated by the SAS, caught a mole in a bucket and flown in an airship. I said, what more will faze me? And
love it.
They came back and said, oh, tell us more. And just the fact that they were interested enough to actually ask the question meant I then had an opportunity, an audience, to tell them what I needed to tell them, because I'd done the conventional, the sell, the quantitative, the qualitative, and, you know, it just wasn't hitting. And I thought, well, at least they're going to know I'm imaginative, if nothing else. And it did the job.
I love that. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Please, can you connect with me on LinkedIn and send me that? Because I think that's just fantastic. It illustrates exactly what we've been sharing, talking about. You know, it's a shame that you had to do it when you got nothing to lose. But as you said, in the end, it didn't hold you back, did it? And I think it comes back to that slide I showed. Be Marmite, don't believe blancmange. There's a reason no one eats blancmange anymore. Marmite sales are doing very well, thank you. So, you know, be Marmite. So I hope I've given you a bit of a flavour of how to start to craft your personal promise, why we call it a personal promise, and that gets you on to reading the next bit. I know we're pushed for time, it's nearly 1, and it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. So interview techniques, just to sort of recap a little bit about what we've talked about. You know, competency-based questions are designed to let you talk about you. They are that invitation to tell an employer about real-life challenges that you've had, that you faced, and how you've overcome them. Because again, what you're trying to answer that question, right, we covered right back at the start, what can you do for me? And old style CVs don't answer that question. Competency-based interviews techniques are to help you do that. Your CV starts that process if you write it in the way we've shared today, but you can start to do that. So you need to focus on what it is that you've done. And again, don't fall into the trap that cost me the job at Tarmac in terms of what, you know, or we did this and my team did that and I got my team. I didn't do it. It's about what did I do? And to start to think about those, you know, how to answer them well, find out what kind of competencies the employer is looking for. You usually get a cue from the JD, from the job description, other things. Identify competency question types of examples. It's really great to sit yourself in the potential employer's shoes and brainstorm, right, if I was them, what would be all the questions I'd ask me? Put yourself in their shoes and then start to map your answers and practice your answers across based on what you've covered with your CV and the process we've gone through. Develop that kind of story using the star for each competency. You've used star C to come up with your transferable assets, the C being the competencies column. In answering questions, you can also answer star R, so star, and the R is reflection. You know, having done that, the result was this. In hindsight, what I might do is something different, or I do it this way, I do it that, or in hindsight, I wouldn't change anything because it worked. So you can use that framework when answering a competency-based question to show the employer that you've not just rested on your laurels, but actually you've thought about it and you've learned from what you've done last time, and it wasn't perfect, but actually got the result, and this is how I might do it differently. So you can start to think about it by doing that way.